Hello, beautiful people. It is Jada Jo. Welcome to or back to the All for Her podcast. I honestly have no idea what episode this is when you're listening because all of the episodes that I've recorded thus far are on my computer, and my computer broke on Thursday. It won't even turn on. And I took it to the Apple store last night and they said that they could fix it, but when they fix it, all my data will be lost. So today I have to take it to a data recovery place to see if maybe they can recover my data before I take it to the Apple store to get my computer fixed. So I have no idea if I'm going to have to re-record all of my podcast episodes. How fun is that? I was so excited for the autumn equinox on Thursday because I thought, I am going to change seasons with the seasons. I'm going to leave this past month of my life behind that has been so hard and step into a new chapter. Thursday was the day I was supposed to post the intro to this podcast. I was supposed to post the cover photo for this podcast on all my social media platforms to let people know that the first episode was coming this Monday. But Monday's in 2 days from now, and I don't even have my computer with my episodes on it. So that's not happening. I'm pretty bummed. I am someone that tries to find meaning in everything that happens in my life. Like, I'm always trying to figure out what sign or message the universe is trying to send me when things happen. And honestly, I can't really figure out this one. I can't tell if the universe is trying to say, hey, I literally broke your computer on the day that you were supposed to post your podcast to let you know that you shouldn't make a podcast. I was trying to redirect you. Or if it's not that deep and I just need to learn how to back up my data on my computer more often. You know, I don't know if it's as deep as I'm trying to make it. I really want to make a podcast, so I kind of just refuse to believe that I'm not supposed to make a podcast. So hopefully that isn't the sign the universe is trying to tell me. But regardless, the lesson that I learned this week, which is a lesson that I have learned a million times in my life, but clearly haven't learned because I continue to learn it, if that makes sense, is to surrender to the fact that I do not have full control in my life. And there are so many times where I feel out of control and I turn to these different mechanisms, i.e. my food, to feel in control. And the thing is, it never helps. Because it's not about feeling control, it's about accepting the fact that you can only control what you can control, and there are forever going to be many aspects of your life that you are out of control in, and it's really hard to accept, at least for me. But I will continue to try to surrender to this fact for the rest of my life. Maybe this is going to be a recurring theme for the rest of my life, and I will continue to learn it for years and years and years down the line. Before we begin, I'm going to give a trigger warning. I will be talking about my eating disorder. If that is not going to be helpful for you, please join us next week for next week's episode. Do what is best for you and your journey. I'm going to start off by giving a little bit of history of me before my eating disorder. I talked in last week's episode, about my childhood, so that will give you a little bit more information about what I was like growing up, which will give a good foundation for this episode if you want to go listen to that one first. But pre-ED, growing up, I did gymnastics, I did cheer for a little bit, and then around age 10, I want to say, I quit sports and I did musical theater for a couple of years, so I stopped doing physical activity. And around this time, around age 12, the second year that I was doing musical theater, was the time that I started to get comments from people around me. Little comments like, hey, why don't you swap out those chicken fingers for an apple? Or, hey, why don't you go on a walk or go play outside? Or just little comments that were innocently encouraging me to try to focus a little bit more on my health, because prior to this time, I just ate what I wanted. I didn't exercise because I didn't want to. I was just a musical theater kid. I didn't want to go do sports. I didn't have any interest in those things. And so I just did what normal kids do. And I ate what I wanted. And I didn't think twice about my health or my body, even though I wasn't necessarily super confident in my body. And I definitely saw changes in my body around age 12 that I hadn't seen in my body prior to this, but I feel as though the insecurity really didn't come from me. It came from other people's comments that I internalized as, oh, who I am right now, what I'm doing right now is not good. It is not enough. And as someone who is a major people pleaser and also just never wants to feel like I'm doing anything wrong, I did not like this feeling. And another thing that I want to mention that I think does add some insight into the development of my eating disorder is my relationship with my father, because I've always had this very, very strong desire to please and make my father proud. I don't know why my father over my mother, but I am still unraveling this concept in therapy. I think that because my dad held himself to such a high standard and was able to reach success because of these high standards that he held for himself, I think part of me thought, wow, if I could make my dad proud, then that would mean that I was fulfilling these super high standards that he holds for himself, if that makes sense. Also, I just didn't get a lot of alone time with either of my parents, but specifically my dad. Growing up, I was a middle child of 7 kids. I struggled to get attention from my parents. I'm not blaming them for any of this. I'm not blaming my father for my eating disorder at all, but it definitely did play a role that my father was very interested in health and exercising and nutrition and things along those lines. So when I did start to implement different habits into my life, he was very supportive of these things, and I got positive attention from him, which I had craved my whole life. So when I got this positive attention, I thought, yes, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep going. And what started very innocently as me just wanting to get healthier spiraled out of control really quickly. And, maybe at first it was a way for me to connect with my dad. He would teach me different lifts that I could do and help me to make healthier meals, whatever it was. But eventually it was no longer about anyone else. It was about me and this voice inside of my head that developed and started to tell me that I was not enough and that I needed to continuously get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier and smaller and smaller and smaller. And other people started making comments about how good I looked, and that just reinforced this idea that, wow, I could get attention from other people because of the way that I look, so I should keep doing this, right? I had never got comments about anything about my appearance until I started to lose weight, until I started to gain muscle and get smaller and have less fat and all of these things. So obviously in my mind, I equated my worth to what I looked like because that was the message that other people were sending me. Within 8 months, I lost a crazy amount of weight that I didn't even have to lose in the first place. And I was consumed with these thoughts inside of my mind. I took a class about medical literature last year, and we talked a lot about the phrasing in which we use to talk about mental illness and the messages that they subconsciously send to the people of the world and the people who have mental illness. And we talked about how sometimes people refer to their mental illness as a different voice inside of their head or a different being inside of them, and how othering a mental illness by creating this concept that it's a different being that is taking over your being can be very harmful. However, I will refer in this episode several times to my ED as a separate voice inside of my head, because for me personally, this was a paradigm that really helped me in recovery to think of my ED voice as separate from my own. And so I just wanted to make that distinction that I am being very careful with the wording that I am using to describe my eating disorder. But truly, for me, it did serve me to separate these voices inside of my head. I just wanted to say that. So about 8 months in, my parents sat me down and they just had a conversation with me saying along the lines that they were worried about me, that, they think that it got out of control, that they wanted to seek the help of someone who knew more about these types of things than I did. And I still remember this conversation very vividly, even though I don't remember the words that they used. I just remember the way that I felt after this conversation, because I truly, truly didn't think that there was anything wrong. I had been researching what health was for the past 8 months. I would go online and search for all of this information about what I should be eating, how I should be exercising, all of these things. And I truly, inside of my mind, thought that I was doing what was best for my health because I was doing the things that the internet said would improve my health. So first of all, them coming to me and saying that they were worried about me, I was like, why would you be worried about me? Look, I'm so healthy. I'm doing all of the right things. I'm eating right. I'm exercising. I am doing the things that you encouraged me to do 8 months ago, and I'm doing the things that the internet says to do, and I'm getting all this praise from other people about how great I look. Why would you think that there's something going on that is not good? And two, it was a very challenging thing for me to hear because, as I mentioned before, I never want to feel like I am doing anything wrong. I am someone that is a big people pleaser, and I am someone that always plays by the book. Is that the saying? Always goes by the book? I'm someone that always follows the rules and tries to do everything right and never ever get negative attention. That is never what I want. So them coming to me and saying that they were worried about me made me feel as though I did something wrong, that there was something bad that I did or that I was bad, even though they were not saying these words. But again, it was just how I was internalizing the things that were said around me. I felt betrayed by my parents telling me that they were worried about me. I felt like that was so hurtful to me for them to say, we are worried about you. We don't think that what you're doing is in your best interest, because I truly thought that it was. So that was such a hard conversation for me to have. And I didn't really feel like I was in a place that I could disagree with them, you know, even though they tried to make it a conversation. They were very much saying, you're going to get help. So they invited this nutritionist over to our house. And again, I very vividly remember this interaction, even though I don't remember all the words that were said. I remember her coming to my house. I remember the exact place that we were sitting. And basically my parents prefaced this meeting by just saying, we just want to talk to someone that knows more than us. Let's just talk and see what she says. You know, we don't have to take any drastic measures yet. Let's just talk. And so I came into this meeting just thinking that I would be able to prove to this woman that I was fine because, you know, she was a nutritionist. She knew about health, and I thought that I knew about health because I had been researching it for 8 months, and I thought that I would be able to get her on my side. So my parents told her their concerns, you know, just saying, Jada Jo has been doing these certain things. She's been eating this way. She's been exercising this way. And we are just worried that it has gotten to a point where it is not healthy. And then they stepped out of the room, and my nutritionist, sat down with just me, and she asked for my opinion basically. And I told her that I was fine. Basically is what I said. I was telling her I just eat really, really healthy because I want to be healthy, and I exercise, and I've lost weight, but it's only because I'm doing all of the right things. You know, I was so sure that there was nothing that was bad or negative or concerning going on. I was so sure. However, she looked at me, and though I don't remember everything she said, I very vividly remember this sentence that she said to me. She said, if you continue to go down the path that you are currently going down, you risk your potential to have kids. And I felt my heart legitimately meaning the exact opposite of that word, but I felt my heart shatter in that moment because I have always dreamed of being a mother. That is something that I have wanted since I was so little. I remember being, 6 years old and telling people, yeah, I want to have 10 kids. That has been something that has meant very much to me for a very long time. So having this person that I was so sure was going to be on my side, in this moment where I really thought that there was nothing going on that was concerning, having this woman look me in the eyes and tell me, you might not be able to have kids if you keep doing what you're doing. I I cannot even describe how this felt. I still feel it in my body when I think about these words, because it really just felt like everything around me went black. When you are so sure that you're doing all of the right things, and then all of a sudden someone comes in and bursts this bubble and tells you, no, you were doing all of the wrong things. That's what it felt like. I just felt as though my whole world went black and white, and I couldn't see color, and I was just shocked and hurt and betrayed, and I wanted to hide in a black hole. I wanted to run away in that moment. I didn't know how to act. I remember my heart beating so fast, and again, I went into fight or flight immediately, and I wanted to literally run away, but I couldn't. So I did not say one other word for the rest of that meeting. I just sat there trying to process what was happening in that moment. My parents came back in, and basically the three of them decided that we were going to start meeting every single week. It very much felt out of my control, but also I couldn't really even hear or see what they were saying or what they were doing. I felt like, again, everything around me just went black and white, and my vision went a little blurry, and I was unable to process what was happening in that moment, which is the definition of trauma, actually, when you're not able to process through and regulate your emotions in that moment. They're stored as trauma. So that was a very, very difficult conversation for me to have. And still looking back, I think one of the hardest parts of this whole story was the part where I had to realize that it had gotten out of hand, that what I thought was me doing all of the right things actually was harmful to me. Accepting that I needed help was, I think, the hardest part of all of this. Not saying that any of the other parts were easy, but that truly was the hardest part, because I had to shift my paradigm completely. Like, everything that I believed, I had to do a 180 twist and realize all of the things that I was doing that the internet told me was healthy, I took to such a degree that it was no longer healthy. And now I had to do all of the things that the internet basically says not to do, and that I've been trying to avoid forever. That's what recovery felt like. It was doing all of the things that I had not wanted to do for the past 8 months, and reversing everything that I believed. I was diagnosed with orthorexia, which the definition is an obsession with eating foods that one considers healthy, a medical condition in which the sufferer systematically avoids specific foods in the belief that they are harmful. So basically, it's when you take eating healthy, or just the word health in general, to such a degree that it is no longer healthy, because too much of anything is not a good thing. So yes, even eating healthy, yes, even exercising can be harmful to a degree if you take it to a degree that is harmful to self. And something that I'm learning recently, just reflecting on my eating disorder, is that yes, it was about the fact that I was not eating any foods that I deemed unhealthy, but at the core of this, quote, issue, it was not about what I was eating. It was about the way that it was taking a toll on my mental health. All I could think about was what I was eating, what I was going to eat next, what I just ate. That was all I thought about every single moment of every single day. So yes, it was harmful that I was not eating enough food. It was harmful that I was cutting out so many food groups. But at the same time, it was never really about what I was eating. It was about the way that I was internalizing what I was eating. And it was about the way that I was thinking about what I was eating, and the way that I was speaking to myself about the way that I was eating, and how that connected to the way that I looked. And it was more about the quality of my life than the actual food that I was eating. However, again, a huge part of my recovery was implementing foods that I was avoiding, and it was about the physical food that I was eating. Something I wrote in my notes was my why stayed the same, but I had to make a 180 flip in my paradigm about what health was. Because, for example, during recovery, I would be challenged to eat a slice of pizza let's say. And I had to tell myself and convince myself and remind myself, for me, in my personal journey, eating a slice of pizza right now is healthier for me than eating the salad that I want to order. And in my mind, that just did not compute because I had been reading for 8 months about how to swap out your pizza for salad. Those types of things where what everyone else saw health as, I had to see health for me as the opposite. And that was so challenging. Again, it was like making a 180 flip in my life and turning everything that I believed upside down and trying to convince myself that what I saw as truth was not truth. It was so challenging, and reflecting on my eating disorder when I was prepping for this episode was actually a little bit more challenging than I thought that it was going to be. Not that it's difficult for me to talk about, but there are definitely some things specifically in recovery that I have never come to terms with or fully processed that have been stored as trauma inside of my body because I didn't allow myself to really have an opinion during this time. I just didn't really feel like I had a lot of say or opinion during this time. I was just doing what all of my doctors and therapists and whoever were telling me to do, and I really did not feel like I had autonomy over my body or what I was doing at all. I just had to do what I was being told to do because I just wanted to get out of recovery as quickly as I possibly could. And that meant that a lot of times in my meetings with my nutritionist, for example, things would happen that I didn't feel like I had a say in, but that made me very uncomfortable. For example, every day that I went to the nutritionist, she would weigh me. First, I wouldn't be able to see what the weight was, but then we would sit down and basically she would tell me whether I gained or lost weight. And if I gained weight, I was praised, and we tried to think about, what can I do to continue to gain weight the next week? And then if I lost weight, I was basically shamed and told that I was not doing what I needed to do and that I wasn't working hard enough, etc., etc. And I would feel awful about myself. And then she would take these, how do I explain it? They basically looked like prongs, and she would go around my body and squeeze different areas of my body and try to figure out what my body fat percentage was every single week, as if it was going to change in 1 week. And so basically she would just squeeze different parts of me. I just felt like an object, and I didn't feel like anyone was trying to listen to how I felt in these moments. It was so difficult, y'all. Recovery was so hard, and I just wish that I could go back and hug myself because I really felt so alone. Because anytime that I had a thought where I was second guessing, what my therapist or what my nutritionist was telling me, anytime that I had these feelings of, I don't want to be doing this, or maybe I don't actually want to recover, whatever it was, anytime that I felt any certain way that I didn't feel aligned with what people were telling me to do, I didn't feel like I could express it. Because if I told my parents, oh, this was so hard for me to eat this certain food, they would just encourage me to eat that food, and it just felt like I was being ignored. No one was really listening to how I was feeling and how difficult it was for me. They just wanted me to do what I was supposed to do. And as someone, again, who is a people pleaser that just wants to do the right thing, I would try my best to do those things, and then I would store all of that emotion inside of my body and just feel like shit all the time. It was so difficult, and I feel like no one talks about the recovery part of an eating disorder as much as the actual struggle of the eating disorder, if that makes sense. I want to make a whole episode on recovery because there are so many things that people don't realize about recovery. Yes, I'm so grateful that I had the resources that I had and that I was even able to get help for my eating disorder, but that does not mean that there were not ways in which I feel like I was more harmed than helped in the recovery process. And there are a lot of things that I'm still trying to process during that time because I don't feel like I had a space to process those things, which I think is so important during the recovery phase, to process those feelings, how you are dealing with it emotionally, not just physically. Yes, the nutritionist could take those measurements every single week, and yes, I could be gaining weight, but if inside my mind the thoughts were the same, or I was still struggling with food just as much, then it doesn't matter. It's not just about the physical improvements, it's about the emotional and mental and spiritual improvements as well. And I'm very, very, very thankful that my therapist was so great during this time. I go to the same therapist that I went to during this time, and she really was such a light in my life. I truly, when I think about my therapist, I see an angel. Like, she's just a light, and she has been since I first met with her when I was 13 years old, and now I'm 21. And my last meeting, we talked about my eating disorder a little bit and just all that I've been through, and that I'm so glad that I have someone that I can walk through all these different stages of life with. But I would go to therapy every other week. I would go to my nutritionist every single week. And slowly but surely, I started to see my therapist a little bit less. And eventually, I weaned off of my nutritionist once I got to a healthy weight. And I got my period back. I was released from my nutritionist meetings, and that was freshman year of high school. And I was just so freaking glad to be done with my nutritionist meetings. I genuinely hated going to the nutritionist. I enjoyed more so going to therapy because, again, I knew that I had so much bottled up in me that when I was able to release it, as difficult as it was to try to talk through what I was feeling, it was so nice. I wish that I could have had that release every single day, or just had more tools or more people around me that I could have talked to, because I did feel so alone. And talking about it for 1 hour every other week, when it was stressing me out every moment of every single day, during recovery, my every moment was in fight or flight. That's what it felt like. I was riddled with anxiety. Yes, I was not thinking about food quite as much or in the same way as I was during my eating disorder, but now my thoughts around food were just, how can I be done with recovery? How can I get people's attention off of me? How can I not need help anymore? Because I hate asking for help. I hate feeling like I'm doing something wrong. I hated all of it. I hated every aspect of feeling like there was something wrong with me and that people had to tend to me, and I just wanted all the attention off of me. I wanted to be able to eat a meal at my dinner table without people looking at what I was eating and how much I was eating. I just wanted to be done. So of course, when I was released from my nutritionist meetings, I was so excited, and I was so glad that I never had to go back there. But at the same time, I feel as though my recovery, in terms of teaching me to have a healthy relationship with food, was definitely cut short, because basically in recovery, they take you to the opposite extreme of what you experienced during the eating disorder. So during my eating disorder, I was not eating enough. I was eating only healthy foods. And then it felt like during recovery, I was taught to turn off all of those thoughts inside of my head that said, you need to eat healthy, you need to eat less, and just eat all of the food as much as I possibly could and ignore my hunger cues, because the idea was that when you have an eating disorder, your hunger cues basically turn off, and you have to reteach yourself how to be hungry again and how to listen to your hunger cues. And so I was taught to eat even when I wasn't hungry, because my body didn't even know what hungry was. And I was told that eventually by doing this, they would balance back out, and I would get hungry at a normal rate, and I would get full at a normal rate, and everything would balance out eventually. But I had to go to the other extreme in order to find that balance. And so then I, got to a healthy weight and got my period back after doing the extreme for, 8 months, a year. And then I was released from recovery. But I was never given help or support in the after stage, when my hunger cues were supposed to start to balance out and I was supposed to start finding homeostasis inside of my body. I was released into the wild during a time when I was in the pattern of eating even when I wasn't hungry. So I just continued to eat when I wasn't hungry because that is what I had been trained to do for the past year of my life in my recovery. I was taught how to let go of all those thoughts telling me to eat less, and now it was the opposite of whenever I felt full in my mind, I thought, nope, that's just my body trying to get me to eat less. Nope, we are going to ignore those thoughts. Those are my ED. And so I would just eat and eat and eat and eat. And once I got to college and I was no longer on a sports team and I was just eating the way that I had been eating for the years prior, where I would eat and eat and eat even when I wasn't hungry, I started to realize, wow, I am not listening to my body at all. I never learned how to do that. I just learned how to shut off the part of me that told me that I was full or that I shouldn't eat anymore, when sometimes that's not my ED. That is my body telling me I am full. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't feel as though my recovery fully supported me in getting to a point that I was no longer struggling with my relationship with my food. I think that I got rid of a lot of patterns that I was experiencing during my orthorexia. However, I did not get to a point where I knew how to implement healthy patterns of eating. And I didn't even realize this until years after, when I was living alone in my apartment in LA, realizing why do I just keep eating to the point that I don't even feel good? And it's because in my mind, not eating always meant, oh, but my ED is trying to restrict me. And so I finally feel like now, after making that realization, and then the next year on my own, doing my own practice of learning what was balanced for me, that is when my true feeling of I am past my negative eating patterns came to fruition. And I really felt like the accumulation of everything I learned in my recovery came to be, 5 years after I got out of, quote, recovery, if that makes sense. And I think that that's very sad. And I think that it makes so much sense why so many people relapse or develop other eating disorders after they recover from one, because there aren't a lot of tools, even in recovery, to learn how to be in balance. Not just to not do what you are doing when you are in the midst of your eating disorder, but to be actually in balance. And I know that recovery and getting that help does cost money. So it's a privileged point of view to even be thinking this way. And I'm so grateful and so privileged to have had the resources that I had during the time of my recovery. I know that not everyone has that, and I understand why recovery can be rushed, because not everyone has the money and the resources to continue to seek help for as long as I believe that a lot of people need in order to actually get to a place where they are in a good place. But it's just something to consider and think about. I just wanted to bring that up just because I don't hear it talked about enough, that just because you are no longer suffering in the way that you did during your eating disorder doesn't necessarily mean that you are in a good place. And that was really hard for me to accept, because I just wanted to be done with all of it. And I just so badly wanted to believe that I was fine and I didn't need help anymore and that I could be past this point in my life. But it came up again later in life. And I'm very grateful that I had the tools that I felt that I needed in order to make this realization, and then to get the help I needed to change the patterns that I was experiencing that I didn't want to be experiencing. But it's all to say that though my eating disorder was so long ago, and while it does almost feel like I'm telling someone else's story when I'm talking about my eating disorder, because it just feels so distant from me, it's continued to come up in my life time and time again, and it's continued to affect who I am. And I believe that the only way that I would have ever gotten to where I am today in my relationship with my food and exercise is to go through what I went through. And I think it's such a beautiful thing that I can sit here today and think about that time in my life and how big that felt to me at that time. I thought that that was going to be my story forever, you know? Like when people asked, what makes you who you are? I thought that forever my thing was going to be my eating disorder. That was the thing for me. And now looking back, it doesn't even feel like it's part of my story, though it absolutely is. It's just that so many other things have happened in my life that are equally as transformative. And so though it felt so big at the time, it's now just a little puzzle piece in my life. And what a beautiful thing to know that in those times when you feel as though one part of your life is all consuming and it's going to be that way forever, at one point it will just be another part of your story. My question of the week this week to ask yourself, to try to get to know yourself a little bit better, is to explore what health means to you. What was taught to you about health growing up? Where do you get your information surrounding health? Is it a feeling? Is it a type of food? Is it some way that you look? What comes to mind when you think about health? And then once you jot down all of these different ideas, ask yourself if this working definition of health sits right with you. Does it align with what you feel is true based on your beliefs and your knowledge and your understanding of your own body? I'm not saying just ignore science if you feel like it's not true, but a lot of times we don't realize until we sit with them that a lot of our beliefs come from other people and we don't actually even believe them when we sit and think about them. So I just want you to ponder for a little bit. Ask yourself what health means to you. This episode, I feel, was a little bit all over the place. I wasn't expecting some emotion to come up that did come up, but I am grateful for you and your patience, and I'm grateful that you're here and listening, despite the fact that this episode is later than I thought that it was going to be released, etc., etc. I'm grateful that you're here despite it all. So thank you. I will see you next week. I love you. This too shall pass.